Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
All right, team, welcome back to the podcast. Today we've got 4 of us in the studio.
What could possibly go wrong?
More voices to the mix. Can only be better, right? Anyway, we've got an important question to ask. Actually, who's here? We should probably introduce ourselves. It's me, Way, as always.
Ev.
Old Matt.
Young Matt.
Oh, there we go. Young Matt is back for some more.
The 2 Matts. It's like the 2 Ronnies, but not funny.
I'll come back to that.
All right, let's...
Because you have to Google the 2 Ronnies.
I was around.
Young Matt's not quite as young as we think he is.
He's just younger than you, which is
Exactly.
not.
Yeah. Rude.
Well, more importantly, less jaded.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's the
For now.
Mentally.
We're working on that.
doing our best to jade him. Is that the word?
Anyway, today's question is, how do we know it's going to work? This is a question we get asked all the time before people come in for a bike fit or getting a bike built or getting some custom wheels built. They come to see Ev. And even if they don't ask it out loud, it'll be going around in someone's head. You know, if I come in for a bike fit, how do I know it's going to work? And it's an important question to answer, because if you're not convinced that something is going to work, then you're not going to get the most out of that experience. So I think I just wanted to explore that question. Maybe it's not the right question actually to be asking. But it's definitely the question that goes around in our minds as we're considering our purchases, our choices, and what we want to do on our bikes. So I think this was, I don't know, there's a few different things that kind of set this question off in my head. Some of it is just like I speak to people on the phone every day, just talking about bike fit and so on. They're like, well, you know, how do I know it's going to actually make a difference? Seems like quite an investment in my time, my effort, my money. You know, what are you going to say to me to convince me to come in? And I assume, Ev, that it's kind of similar for you when someone wants to get like a bike service. Why should I get this one? Why should I get the full service instead of just, you know, giving me a clean? Or your brain. Or, you know, when you're building someone's set of wheels.
What's the honest answer? Why are you insulting my intelligence, sir? Well, no, but I'll put that to you then.
Oh.
When somebody asks you that question and they say, well, it's my time, what do you know, and because you're being the salesman at that point, you're not going to turn around to them and say, well, it's my time too, and my experience. And I've spent all these years, you know, finessing my expertise in bike fit. And you know, the whole idea is that at least that first step that somebody's made in contacting you is showing a certain level of trust. But they're not 100% implicitly trusting you yet. They still want you to push them a little bit over the edge, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's more of a marketing sort of sales tactic at that point, isn't it? You're just trying to, because you can explain. You can sit there and say, well, look, here are all the things we're going to do. Here's all the stuff we're going to get, and here's all my experience and knowledge, and you know that I've amassed over the years. But you know, pay me. Come in and do the bike fit, and then you'll sit them down, and then you will explain all these things. So how do you kind of convince somebody 100% without doing the thing first before they? I thought it was just trying to get my attention for a minute.
Well,
Matt kicking me under the table. Yeah. Footsies.
I just I've had enough.
Yeah, you're like, all right, stop.
Yeah, you've talked enough.
Your turn.
My turn.
What do you think?
Just before that, like, I find it really fascinating that people come in for a bike fit, and after the session, they'll be like, that was totally not what I was expecting. That was like way more in depth. Like, it took me in a completely different direction. And it still fascinates me that someone has decided to come in, invest time and effort and money, but
They didn't really know what
they didn't really
to
know
expect.
what
Yeah.
what they were getting, and
What-
and you know some of that maybe just on our part of like
Maybe you didn't explain it fully,
yeah.
and yet
But,
they still.
But how do
booked
you convince?
Yeah.
You can't explain everything.
No, that's what. Yeah, and that's it. That's it. So there's a certain level of wave a magic wand, dangle keys kind of thing that you have to do, even if what you are doing is completely legitimate. And you know there are plenty of people out there that.
Everything's legitimate. There's
Well,
nothing illegal.
no, but there are plenty of people out there doing things, whether it's related to bikes or not. Where there are plenty of people out there vying for dipping into your wallet to take your money, and their motives are not honest and not legitimate. So, and that's the thing. We live in a society where
Sure.
you always
Yeah.
you always have to convince people, I'm not trying to rob you.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to rob you.
Well, we live in the age of fake news,
Yeah.
false truths.
False truths. Is that the new fake news? Is that your version of fake news? False truths?
I don't know. Just stuff bubbling in my head. Anyway, Matthew looks like he's got something to say.
Always.
Go on then. What are you going to say?
Okay, so
Where do we start?
where do we start? So, what was the question? Will it
Place to
work?
start.
Will it
Yeah.
work?
Will it
How
work?
do I know it's going to work?
So, that in itself is an entirely valid question, but framed in my humble opinion, in completely the wrong way. So, will it work? Yeah, you want to know that you're getting a return on your investment. Humans are naturally skeptical. We're glass half empty kind of people, naturally. So we want to know that we're going to get something in return for an investment of time, money, effort, all that kind of stuff. But the question, will it work? I think we kind of have to frame this differently. It's kind of like, you've got to this point where you're thinking about coming in for a bike fit, or you're thinking about, there's something up with your bike and it's making a noise, and, or it sounds like a bag of spanners or whatever. And you're like, oh, I can't quite figure it out myself, but I know something's wrong. So I need to seek advice and expertise in an area where I might be lacking there might be holes in my knowledge that I need to plug. So the will it work thing it implies that I'm going to use the word transaction because I haven't got a better one at the moment, but it implies that it is black and white. I invest X amount of money, X amount of time, and receive X result. And it's kind of transactional, black and white. But whenever there's a human body involved, especially like I'm talking about bike fit here, especially when there's a human body involved, there's always an element of maybe, what if? And there's always nuance because everyone's different. So rather than, and I think like we always bang on about the industry, but I think the industry is kind of a bit at fault here in the fact that it has, up to this point, touted bike fit as a precision, exact science, for want of a better word. And it's kind of like, input equals output, like it's kind of black and white, and that is not the case. There is no effective guarantees that anything is going to work, regardless of what it is. Whether you go to the garage to get your car looked at for an engine light that hasn't turned off in 10 years, whether you get your bike serviced, whether you're coming for a bike fit, whether you go to like a physical therapist or a doctor or any other medical practitioner, there's no guarantee 100% categorically that is going to work. So I think we need to reframe the question in terms of from will it work to what can I learn from this? Where are the holes in my knowledge and how can I go about finding some of the answers to the questions that I have, rather than it being a black and white transaction. I'm going to go to Hogwarts, get tapped by the magic wand and be magically fixed.
Good word, fixed.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's
a
again,
myth. We'll bust that myth.
Yeah.
So I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. The bike industry doesn't do itself much favours in touting bike fit as something that it potentially isn't. Because the clue's in the name that it says bike fit. Actually, the bike is arguably less than half of the system. It is half of the system, but arguably it's the least important half. The body is the most important half of that system. And whenever you're working with human bodies, there's always an element, well, there's definitely always an element of change that happens over time. And there's always an element of nuance as well. Like, no two people on this planet are the same. So how can it be a black and white transaction that it will work or it won't work? It's always we're always operating in this grey area. And I think if we frame it as in the more investment you put in terms of your effort and in terms of willingness to experiment, explore and try things, the more you will get in return on that investment. You might not get all the answers, but you will certainly get more of a return. As I was watching some clips on YouTube of Professor Brian Cox recently, who they were pressing him about, this is going to be a contentious, well, potentially inflammatory subject, but they were like, do you believe in God? And how do you know?
They asked a physicist, do you believe in God?
But he was very gracious with his answer, and he's like, well, and they were talking about the origins of the universe and all this kind of stuff, and his basic answer was, we don't know. Categorically, we cannot say categorically that there is or is not the existence of a creator, and we cannot categorically say that the universe started with a large event that, in the form of an explosion or, whatever it kind of was. We just don't know. And it's the same thing, like, zooming out quite a lot. But it's the same thing with BikeFit. Honestly, you just don't know whether it's going to work or not. But the other part of you used the word convince and convincing people. And again, I think that's kind of like an interesting kind of term.
That's maybe the wrong term as well, isn't
Exactly.
it? Because you're not there to convince them. You're there to impart on
to help
them your knowledge that you have, which is obviously far more extensive than their knowledge, which is why they're here, which is why they're paying you money. But there's a limit to that as well, because everyone is an individual. So every time you get anybody in the studio and you start fitting them, there's a part of you might have a load of experience, a load of knowledge, but there's always going to be a part where you're like, oh, this is interesting.
But even on a more simple level than that, it's like if you're trying to convince someone, then that, in my mind, implies that there's a wall up, there's a barrier to that communication.
Yeah.
I have to convince you to buy this pen, to use that analogy. I shouldn't have to convince you to come and get a bike fit, because you're obviously curious anyway as to, you've obviously got a problem or some sort of pain or discomfort or something that's bugging you about your interaction with the bike.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to convince you to explore that kind of stuff. I'm not here to sell it to you. I'm here to have a dialogue with you about the problems that you're experiencing between you and your bike.
Yeah.
So I think convincing is kind of like an interesting term, and it's kind of like much more of a sales kind of. And this is again the world we live in.
You keep triggering me. You keep saying all the things.
And I'm going to keep talking so I can keep annoying you.
Let me interject
Go on,
one bit, because you use the pen analogy, the selling the pen analogy, and you're using that as the analogy. And this is interesting because everything goes back to marketing yourself and this idea of convincing and the idea of selling a product. You're not. If you're trying to convince somebody to buy a pen, you're showing them the pen and then telling them it's the best pen ever. It's the best pen ever, But you're not having to also convince them that the pen exists in the first place.
Exactly. So there's a physical product there,
right?
And that's another hurdle with bike, because there's not really a physical.
But
product.
how does DiCaprio convince the person to buy the pen in Wolf of Wall Street? He creates the problem.
Story.
Yeah,
You
create the need and the niche for the product that you're trying to sell.
But go back to that again when you're talking about bike fit, because you mentioned in the bike industry, you mentioned what the bike industry knows and how it deals with bike fit and this kind of thing, this kind of ethereal, intangible product, right? The bike industry is good at doing one thing: selling product. Bike Fit isn't a product. You don't walk in and somebody goes, here's a box, it says Bike Fit on it.
I disagree.
Oh, okay, all right.
I disagree.
Right.
Not with the premise that you've just stated, but
Well, I'm glad,
the industry.
glad I was half right.
You've been a bit. Yeah, we'll get into that.
I've been a bit arrogant lately.
Yeah, well, you've kind of got a
Bit
you've been
arrogant.
right once, and you've kind of like gone with it.
I'm gonna.
But the bike industry has tried to package it as a product,
Yeah.
and this is why Retool exists.
Yeah.
So they have tried to package a tangible product out of something that is inherently, like vague.
Yeah. So they
and
created.
intangible.
They created.
They created
Hardware.
a product. They created hardware
Yeah.
so that people find it easier to perceive value.
Yeah.
So you're getting like, I don't want to bash Retool too much. I don't really care, to be honest. But it's like, we hear it all the time, don't we? Oh, I had a Retool fit. Well, what does that mean? Like, someone put some markers on you that may or may not have been in the right place and shown you some body angles.
Yeah.
Cool story, bro. Nice one. So what did you get out of that? Either it worked or it didn't.
Yeah.
But that's where there's levels, and you peel back the layers of the onion. You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, keep
So
going.
you peel back the layers of the onion, and then you get into kind of more of like what we do, which is probably posing more questions, or as many questions as we are providing answers, because ultimately you're in charge of your own bike riding, or we want you to be in charge of your own bike riding. We're here to help, but we're not here to tell you what to do. You have to own it and earn it with regards to whatever you want to get out of this sport that we do. So ultimately, you are in control. You have all the power in this in this kind of dialogue, and we're effectively here as a soundboard to hold the mirror up, and that is kind
You're
of
teaching.
yeah. Well,
Right,
It's
more-
like,
it's
like
more-
a coaching.
It's like
It's
a
more
coaching.
in common with
Yeah,
coaching
it's
and
more in
teaching
common
than
with
it
coaching and
is
teaching.
transaction of
Exactly.
of
So
product.
going back to the original point that I've waffled away from is that the question is valid, but we're framing it all wrong.
I think it's a question of timing, though. Going back to the word convince, like I still think that people need to be convinced to come into a bike fit, to kind of book that bike fit, to say that they want to come in. But once you're in the session itself, like I don't need to be convincing somebody of the value of that bike fit or whatever it is. It's all about once you're actually there, then it's very much more of a collaboration or dialogue between like fitter and rider, and the exploration has to take place between those two people rather than one person saying it's this way and this is the way and you should be doing it this way.
But this is where yours and my experiences differ, because you are far more on the end of the phone talking to people about potentially coming in for a bike fit than I am. I spend the vast majority of my time in here interacting one-on-one.
Yep.
Once people are already in, they've already got a foot in the door, so to speak.
Yep.
And then it's just a case of like, right, okay, now we're going to go through the process. I'm your guide, but
you're
you
not
are
the
very
salesman.
much an active part of this. Like, we're here to work together. Whereas, you spend a lot more time than I do on the end of the phone talking to people about why bike fit is important and how it can potentially help their riding. So we have different experiences there. So
Yeah, for sure. But it's still the same process of, the end goal is
the
still
end goal is
same.
always the same. Yeah, it's just that you get people maybe earlier in the journey than I do.
Yeah, and I think that's the critical thing, is like figuring out where people are in their kind of journey of making decisions to kind of help themselves. Like we had that lad who literally appeared at the door just now and said, I'm getting some back pain on my bike. I heard you do some kind of bike fitting. Can I just bring my bike round and you just kind of move my saddle around?
Yeah, and that's literally what he thinks bike fit
Fitting.
is. He thinks it's get my saddle in the right place.
But
that's part of it.
his awareness level is so far from like
you
kind
are
of
where you
he
are,
could-
right? So if that's his awareness level, you got to meet him where he's at.
Yeah.
And explain. It's like, okay, so that's you've got to this point, you've made the connection that maybe some pain in your body could be caused by how you're interacting with the bike. That's one potential cause. But here's something else to think about, and this is what you can get out of this session, this knowledge, this experience of, you know, peeling back another layer of the onion, and here's how we can help you with your bike riding.
That's where the hard sell comes in, or the hard part of
The
selling.
hard part,
Because you've got somebody coming through the door. It would help if everybody wore a T-shirt with the minimum amount of money that they want to spend on something, so that you can understand, like, okay, somebody comes in and they're like, what comes out of their mouth is, you clearly don't really value what it is we do. But it's not because you don't value it, it's because you don't really know what it involves.
we don't know what the value is,
Right,
because it is
exactly.
not tangible.
Yeah.
You can't touch it.
Yeah.
And this is where it's on all of us who work in this godforsaken industry.
Service industries.
Well, service industries, yeah. But it's especially on like behalf of like people who work in the bike industry. It's our job to make sure that people have access before they get into us to the knowledge about what it is that is involved, so that then they can make a decision for themselves, and they don't have to be convinced to come and get a bike fit or get a custom set of wheels or whatever it is.
Like, I don't know what the initial intention behind Retool was. I kind of have I have ideas.
Money, mate.
Yeah, but
The
also
Big S got it, and they were like, we can make bare P doing this. This bike fit's well popular circa 2011.
yeah, and but on the back of that, you're trying to make money by helping people feel better on their bikes,
Yeah.
and also for them to be able to make better product, maybe because they can figure out, you know, what geometries and shapes of bike would actually work for maybe the average population.
Why are they still making such a
Hash of
mess of it?
Yeah.
Then?
So, but
Well,
this is
because they're really stopping Retool support. They're not really
No,
using
but
it
not just Retool. Like, there's so much more. Like, okay, what?
Because-
last 10 years. Oh, go on then.
I'll tell you for why. So this is exactly what. So we listened to another podcast, a few of us, like in the past week or so, and people should check it out. And I think this is like a lot of where a lot of this conversation has come
Put
from.
a link to it in the description.
Yeah, it was
Cycling in Alignment.
Cycling in Alignment.
Colby
Pierce chatting with Ben Sirota. Now, if you don't know who Ben Sirota is, go and find out, because this guy, if it's worth knowing, Ben knows it. And he's been in the industry a long time, and he builds amazing bicycles, but he also wrote most of the book on Bike Fit. And judging by, I never met the guy, never spoke to the guy, but judging by listening to him speak, he's a very eloquent dude, and he clearly has an affinity for working with people. And going back to your point of like, why is Retool is it a thing? What we are trying to do is, first of all, whether it's building frames, building wheels, bike fitting, we're trying to service our clients and give those clients the best experience possible to help them achieve what they want to achieve within cycling in our context. It's basically service industry 101, right? You know, service the client. Then if you can make money off of that, that's a happy coincidence, right? So if you can make money either making an excellent product, providing an excellent service, and you can get it to a point where you can make a living from that, then that's kind of like happy days, right? But then what happens is that service at a certain level of scale gets diluted. And this is where Retool steps in terms of bike fit, right? So bike fit used to be the kind of, it used to be people in studios, single practitioners, obviously, or usually, that offer a very bespoke, personalized service to their clients. And what kind of motion capture bike fit in my mind has tried to do is to scale that and make it repeatable, replicable, and scalable. And it works to a point, right? So this is where the normative ranges come in, the body angles, and kind of making sure that all the boxes are green on the screen, and bueno, bike fit's great. That's where the service gets diluted. And I think that's where maybe people have lost a bit of, I'm going to use this word, faith in bike fitting as a whole, that maybe they've had some bad experiences with either people using certain systems, people employing certain philosophies, or with certain practitioners, and they've kind of got a little bit sort of burnt, if you like, by that experience, and they may need convincing even more that, you know, bike fit is a thing. It's not like, you know, some quack shop
Just
that you go in. It's not woo woo. You know, it is. You've just got to find your practitioner. It's like, you know, you always use the analogy of a chef way. You know, everyone's trying to cook you a nice meal, but you might have a great omelette in one restaurant and not in the other.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about that analogy too is that, you know, we're quite willing to go and try different like cafes, restaurants, or like, I don't know, I am. Like, I don't really have to think too hard about trying a new restaurant. And I kind of have an idea of like what food might be there or served, but I have no idea what the quality is like. But I'm willing to give it a go.
Put it another way though, what if the last 3 restaurants you went to, you got food poisoning at everyone?
Yeah, that's true.
Would you
Yeah.
need some convincing to go to another
So
restaurant?
it's totally legitimate, and this is not a failing on behalf of the clients. It's a failing on behalf of the industry, because there's no standard. There's no standardized, and this is again where motion capture is kind of, maybe it's sold something that it isn't. Motion capture can be useful
It's
in
a
the right
tool.
hands. It's a tool to do a job.
A tool is not.
And the tool is only as good
as
as the
the-
tool that's using it, right? So
But that's like the whole point of like the tool was to try and standardize stuff, to create like a mark of excellence or whatever. Like you've used this system, so you have got to a certain standard, and so that would convince people that it's a worthwhile, you know, endeavor to go through. You know, it's worthwhile
selling
getting
the
that
tool.
service.
It's not it's the person the expert using
Sure,
the tool.
yeah. The
that is
tool,
important.
the tool has became the mark of excellence.
exactly,
like-
the tool became the be all
Yeah,
and end all, not the operator.
That's a bit like trying to sell a bicycle
Full
and
stop.
claiming that it's the exactly,
Yeah.
and
It's
then
like
claiming that
saying-
the bicycle
Yeah.
has inherent performance to it.
Exactly.
It doesn't have any performance to it. It's a stationary, inanimate
Yeah.
object until a rider gets on.
It's like any branding. It's like saying all Pinarellos are great bikes because it's Pinarello.
Yeah,
Like-
but it's like it's the same running shoes. This is the fastest shoe.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. It's a ridiculous premise that in loads of other areas of life and consumerables gets laughed at. But for some reason in cycling, that we're held to a different standard almost. And it's like, it's the same in kind of like if you go and see like a physical therapist or some sort of like body practitioner, there's a whole load of different
There's a range
competence
of-
levels.
Yeah, exactly.
Like just because you have the diploma doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be that competent.
Yeah.
So this whole thing of like, taking something that is very unique and bespoke, scaling it to a point where it becomes diluted, that's kind of, I think, where the industry's fallen down. And we've got, as an industry and as kind of like a sector of like the service industry, if you like, we've got some catching up to do to effectively regain the trust of the cycling public at
I feel like
large.
we're fighting a losing battle when it comes to that.
Yeah, mate, of course we are.
Well, there's just like in terms of scale, there's like minuscule number of like bike fitters or mechanics relative to everybody else who.
But
rides a bike.
but we're in an industry where a large percentage of the industry is just out for trying to convince people to buy their product over their competitor's product or over their own product from the previous season, which is the whole
But if
it's
you
got
think
new
about
paint
a
job or what-
consumable relative to a service that you're providing, essentially it ends, from a lot of these kind of big brands that sell bikes and buy like, the truckload, it ends as soon as that bike is
Yeah.
delivered.
Yeah.
Whereas in the service industry, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
Right.
'Cause you wanna have a
And we get
relationship with your
we get held to different standards, and rightly, we should hold ourselves to higher standards. But that transaction ends once that bike arrives from you from Germany in a box, and it's done. That's where it differs.
But then that's kind of where different service levels or different brands will kind of offer different levels. you know, if you think of any like high-end brands, let's say you're buying a car or something, let's say you're buying a McLaren or something like that, and you buy the car and you go away, they're not going to leave you alone. Like once you've driven out the garage with that new car, there will be some more touch points like afterwards of like, hey, how's it going? How's the car feeling? How do you like the leather seats?
Service
How do you like it?
packages and things like that. Because that's true of bicycles as well. Except you don't really get that level of, because you're not spending that much. You don't get that level of aftercare.
But I feel that's where it's kind of lacking.
But the touch points are only there if things go wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so if I, remember back in the days of like working in a bike shop, it's like, there were no follow-up emails or follow-up calls or touch points just to see how it was going.
Yeah.
Because it's a volume game.
Yeah.
Whereas like McLaren, I don't know how many cars they sell a year, but probably not as many as bicycles as Giant sell, for instance. No. So they don't have that kind of impetus or time to put into it because it becomes, once you scale it beyond a certain point, it becomes a volume game.
They don't have that infrastructure anyway.
Yeah, because that costs too much.
Think about
costs too much.
And because of the nature of the bicycle industry as well, because every part of a bicycle is made by somebody different.
Yeah,
it's not like you go to Ferrari, they're making most of the parts for the car. They might buy in something else like an Audi or BMW, bit of an engine or something, but for the most part, they're putting most of their attention into supplying that product. Whereas with bikes, it's like, well, the frame comes from Giant, let's say, the wheels come from somewhere else, the gear set comes from somewhere else, the handlebars come from somewhere, and it's just basically whoever you buy the bike from, whether it's like a local bike shop or a bigger company, or even straight to consumer, it's still, they bought in parts and they're just a reseller.
Yeah. But I think this is where the opportunity is, especially for like local bike shops, where why would someone go to a local bike shop rather than clicking and buying online? It's for that kind of knowledge and that touch point and that connection and that relationship that you're supposed to be building with the shop, so that you get a better level of service.
To be convinced.
Yeah, and
it's a good idea that somebody's
But also meeting people
expertise.
Like kind of along their kind of journey of realization or knowledge. Someone like, I'd rather someone just come in and buy a bike and be, out riding because they can start to experience what an amazing thing it is to ride a bike. But then there has to be like a journey along the way where those questions that they ask can be answered. Like, oh, I'm getting back pain, so what does this mean? Oh, well, maybe my bike fit's not right. So, where does that kind of dialogue?
How much pain are you experiencing, and what's it worth to get that fixed?
I'm going to throw a different angle on this. So, use the word fixed again.
I did that for you.
Yeah,
that's why I
appreciate
stared
that.
you right in the face.
Yeah, I saw that. Fixed. Yeah, I didn't appreciate that. Throw a different angle on this. Maybe people want to be convinced and need to be convinced because they are unwilling to take on the responsibility themselves. So if they've outsourced the problem, it is not therefore in their hands.
It's not
anymore.
their fault when it turns out.
It's not their fault when it turns out that they are the problem.
Yeah. That's an interesting take.
Truth bombs.
Well, again, it's
discuss.
Again, like, people can only make decisions when they have the relevant knowledge at hand. Like, if you don't, like, to arrive at the...
I think I would dispute that given current events.
Yeah, but like, to arrive, let's stay on bike fitting, like to... to arrive at the conclusion that, okay, maybe it's not the bike, but I actually have to work on, say, my flexibility or mobility and my strength in order to have that amazing riding experience. It's quite a journey to get to that point. And usually that involves a little bit of pain, because pain is your best teacher, isn't it? But I feel like it's the same thing for, like, kind of all the kind of choices that you can make within, like, say, building a bike. Like, by the time you get to, say, building a bike for yourself, from a frame to choosing handlebars, wheels, all the rest of it, you've probably been through a bit of pain and learning already through some other bike choices that you bought. Maybe you bought, like, you know, a bike off the shelf and it wasn't quite right. And so this time you've got to a point where you've accrued enough knowledge that you want to choose the right kind of parts for it. Or like for wheels, like, you know, if you build a set of wheels for someone, then you're going to take into account, you know, not just how many spokes they need, but, you know, how do they want to ride it? Like what kind of wheel is right for them?
That's why somebody's going to want, you know, a custom set of wheels. Let's say whether it's wheels or a bike or whatever, there are decisions to be made on, you know, what are you doing with it? Why do you want a set of road wheels for your cyclocross bike or whatever, you know?
Matt's smirking.
So this is the optimist's outlook. I want to give people the realist view now. But yeah, so yeah, your argument is valid. One might even say noble. I'm going to offer a different perspective in that, going back to your original question of will it work, I think people just want to outsource the responsibility. They don't want to.
They just want to be told.
They want to be told yes, it will work, or no, it won't work, and that lifts all responsibility then off that person, and you're putting that responsibility on the practitioner, mechanic, wheel builder, whatever, to essentially get a result for you.
That's why people have a go at GPs all the time, isn't it?
Exactly.
Well, I went to the GP and they just prescribed me some.
Well, we had a lovely chap in yesterday
exactly.
who was a GP, and we were having very similar discussions to this. And he provided some enlightening insight on the inner workings of a doctor's surgery. You know, we're in PR, not ER, effectively. He's genuinely in ER. But it's that thing of, like, you know, I think a lot of people aren't ready to take on the responsibility for their own well-being. And it's this kind of like, oh, if I outsource it, I'm paying, so I'll be fixed. And this is kind of like a very 21st century kind of viewpoint that, you know, if I pay enough money, I will be fixed.
That's a very entitled view as well to take on it, isn't it?
Exactly. Welcome to the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome to the West in the 21st century.
Well, yeah, true.
But I think that almost you kind of have to play the game, though. You know, if that's kind of what people think, then if they come in for a fit, you've already convinced them that maybe there's something worth, like, kind of investing in here. And so maybe that's our job then, once they're here, to convince them that, maybe it's worth exploring this avenue, this avenue, this avenue. Maybe you could be working on this, and then this and this. You might not know about this yet, but these are kind of open channels. And if you do this, then this might happen. And yeah, as you said, Matt, like, quite often people leave with more questions than they are answered, but they have a way of, you know, figuring stuff out. And I think that's maybe where that kind of like, this was like way more than I thought it was going to be, when people come in and they're like, this isn't, I thought you were just going to, you know,
move my saddle up and down. Yeah, exactly. But the responsibility has to be taken on at some point. Usually it's towards, like, you know, when we start talking and you guys start going through the process, you start making changes to the bike, you essentially start holding up the mirror, like, it's like, oh yeah, you think this is how you move? Surprise. This is how you move. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty compelling evidence.
You know, people look at a bike, they don't see themselves riding the bike, like, very rarely, unless you ride past a shop window, and, you know, you should be looking where you're going. But
it's that, like, that assumption of that kind of, you know, burden of responsibility does get taken on eventually if you hold up the mirror and you talk to that person in the right way. But it's where in that journey, that's where it kind of differs. Some people, they already have that notion of responsibility before they even get to us. Other people need a little bit of coaxing in order to take on that responsibility for themselves. Because honestly, no one cares as much as you do. Like, genuinely, like, you are the only person that cares as much as you do about your own stuff. So knowing that, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do and what help am I going to seek to help me get there, but what am I going to do about it? So, you know, you can't just talk about it, you got to be about it.
I'm going to pose a question to young Matt here.
He's not
Still
set
here.
out yet, has he?
I just want it to be noted quickly though that you did say before we started recording you didn't know if you had much to say, and then 10 minutes later we were talking about the creation of the universe. But
Turned into an episode of Cosmos.
I'll-
Do you know what?
question.
Like, genuinely, when we started talking in the intro to this podcast, I thought I was going to fall asleep. I was like, I've got no to say here. Turns out I was wrong. Yeah, there you go. I know, it just came to me. What can I say?
Why don't I call you a dark horse?
I'm a river to my people.
So for young Matt, though,
Ask away, yeah.
you've been through a few different bike fits,
Yeah.
and you've had different results through
Yeah.
like, different bike fits. So how does that make you feel about bike fit? Like you've been to like several different practitioners, you've had different results with varying degrees of, I don't know, air quotes, success, so on. Like, has that got you any closer to where you want to be, or has that just confused you even more?
Well, the fits that confuse you more are usually going to be the ones that are not getting you closer to where you want to be.
Right.
I think it goes back to like what we were saying before about it being a collaboration. It's a bike fit is almost like a workshop, isn't it? It's a workshop, not in the physical, not in the sense of a room, like a mechanics workshop, in the
put you
sense
to
of like a collaborative workshop between,
Yeah.
you know, two or more people. You want to leave with a greater sense of knowledge, even if that doesn't mean that everything is 110% pinpoint correct. If it's 90% correct, you know why. And it's,
See, I would take umbrage to this terminology. This correctness.
but
Poking all
I
the
know
right
exactly what
buttons.
you mean,
Okay,
and
yeah.
I'm just being facetious because I can. But is what you're kind of getting at is like, so obviously, like we had a workshop, a dialogue, a bit in just before Christmas. Would it be fair to say that well, you got to define success for yourself, right? First off, but what I'm taking, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what you're saying, is that if the path to improvement is more illuminated than it was when you started, that is effectively success.
yeah, I think
You're not there yet, but the journey has become more clear.
Yeah, I think when people ask like, is this going to work? Like maybe what they're really asking is like, how is this going to work? Why is this going to work
For me.
for me?
Can you help me, and what does that look like?
Exactly. What does that look like, rather than yes or no? Is this going to work? But they just want that reassurance to get them over the line that they're almost at.
Just want a hug.
Well, it's whether are they almost at the line, or are they like way before that? Because there's such a range of.
Well, everyone's line's in a different place.
So
isn't it?
somebody walks in. There's you've got the people who have got preconceived notions of, I really want this bike. Now I'm going to pay a bike fitter to give me permission to spend 10 grand on whatever bike.
Well, this week's been particularly interesting because we've had so many people coming in at different levels of, you know, we had someone who we've seen several times, or you've seen several times, Matt, and you've been really trying to get into, you know, why is this model not really working? Like, you know, we've tried different cranks, we've tried different handlebars, we've tried this, and actually it just turned out that she needed bigger pedals or like a mid-foot cleat position.
But the whole reason that we got to that point was that this particular person was very open and receptive to trying new things and understood it as a process rather than a one-off event.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, she was very kind of like open to trying things, which makes it much easier from my perspective because I have effectively their permission to fail and try things and go, okay, well, let's leave no stone unturned. We might be looking under a few rocks before we actually find something that illuminates the path forward. But yesterday, after I've been working with this particular person on off for 18 months, time has flown.
Really?
18 months, right? Yeah. And yesterday was kind of like, a really illuminating session, because there was some feedback that this particular rider provided over the riding that she'd been doing over Christmas on a different bike on the other side of the world. And there was just one little bit of feedback which set off a cascade of things in my brain based on things that I'd seen you do in your sessions, other things I've listened to, other things that I've, you know, experimented with different kind of riders, like way back in the past that I'd even forgotten about. And it's like, oh, we haven't looked under that rock yet. Let's try that. And that suddenly like illuminated a path forward. And now we've got a new plan to see where that goes. And, you know, it's kind of, that's that continuous dialogue that we've been having to see, how good can we get this? Yeah. But there is a point, because the bike is finite, whereby it will be as good as it can be in that particular time and space. And ultimately there is, you know, a responsibility to that on that rider as well, to do the things that they need to do to improve their experience of the bike that doesn't involve the bike.
Yeah. But then, you know, we've also had the opposite experience of where, you know, we've provided people with loads of information. They've gone out to try and make a decision, had loads of other opinions come back at them, and they're paralysed by all the like kind of information. They're just like, just tell me what to do.
Yeah, which is equally as valid as well. And that is a failing on the industry as a whole, because ultimately the bike industry has a truckload of male ego flying around, which is the worst type of ego. And like people get bounced from pillar to post and they don't know who to believe. Yeah. And that's a difficult and challenging situation to be in as well, because where do you put your trust? Because bikes ain't cheap. You know, it's a lot of money.
Is it just me who thinks that that's actually an easy question to answer?
Yes.
Okay, carry on.
Do you want to answer it for the listeners?
Well,
I know what you're going to say, because I work with you.
Yeah. Who are you going to trust? The people that you've paid to get through a bike fit, to kind of do some research to figure out what works for you, or the bike shop that you've just walked into who want to take your money?
But that's black and white for us to see, because we've been doing this far too long and we're far too jaded, and we've been in all facets of the industry. We've worked in shops, we've been self-employed, we've done our own stuff. So, you know, as a kind of a relatively new cyclist, like, and one of the lines that this particular person was kind of coming to us with as well, you know, it's an authorized dealer for this brand. They must know what they're doing. I know what you're going to say, but put yourself in their shoes. It's like, we know that not everyone in the bike industry doesn't have your best interests at heart, but people haven't necessarily been burnt by that before, don't know like who to trust.
So again,
and that's valid.
What's interesting is somebody saying, well, that's an authorized dealer of a particular bicycle. They're not relating that experience to the experience of, say, a car dealership, because a car dealership, the first person you experience when you walk into a car dealership is a car salesman, and I thought that was pretty.
But this is where the standards of the bike industry and the standards of other industries that are like, you know, they're held to different kind of levels, right? So we think because like cycling is a hobby and a passion for most people, that people have their best interests at heart.
Especially if those people are Italian.
Potentially. So, but that's the thing. Whereas a car salesman, you know, going into that, all they're interested in is getting as much out of your wallet as possible and putting as many extras on that bill as they can.
You would, and my
we know that's how the bike industry works.
It's exactly
totally
the same when you walk into.
It's only 105, sir. Yeah, so here's the Dura Arce.
Dura
Arce. Yeah, this is what you need.
Or if you're feeling really flush, Campagnolo.
Super Record. EPS.
Yeah.
If you want to look at your bike rather than ride it. Yeah. But that's the point, isn't it? Like, we know that because we've been doing it long enough that we have that expectation based on experience. If you're new to this, you think that, oh, everyone loves cycling as much as I do, and everyone's like super pumped on this.
Again, this goes back to the original point, the word convince, the power of reputation.
Yeah.
If you've got a big brand, you've got a big expensive brand that's been around for many, many, many years, people are inclined.
Is it a big red S?
Yeah.
It's a big red S.
Well, it's big red S.
It's
a big P.
Can we just like umbrella term it? Big cycling.
Big cycling. It's big cycling.
Big
Big C.
The big C.
Oh no.
Big cycling. We'll leave it there.
Big cycling. But
Well,
yeah,
big cycling does not have your best interests at
No,
heart.
but
So
how-
who do you turn to? Who do you trust? Do you trust the authorised dealer? Do you trust,
Who do you trust? Money, money, money. Who do you trust?
But you can see where the confusion lies, right?
And I mean, we live in like this age of like information is at your fingertips, right? It's just everywhere, it's streaming out of every orifice. Like, and there's everyone on the internet is some kind of authoritarian figure of like, I know how to do this.
We're
you
still
do
reeling from the news age, where the original age of printed media was, well, you know, but it's in.
So
it's
I think
printed
that
in
I
black
think
and
it's,
white,
yeah, like printed news, and I think like CNN have got a lot to answer for. I'll tell you for why.
Not just them.
It's the 24-hour news cycle. So when I think it was CNN were the first network to go to a 24-hour news stream.
Called them out now, so it better be.
Mate, they're not interested in me. What are they going to take? My £300 steel frame? But they've got to fill it with something, right, to keep people engaged and watch it. This is how Instagram and TikTok works. They've got to keep you scrolling, keep you on the platform in order to get what they want out of it. So there's just a barrage of stuff,
Because
information.
everyone's trying to get your attention.
Everyone's trying to get your attention. It doesn't necessarily mean that that information is factual, correct, informative, however you want to kind of like spin it. But it's information that's there, and we are now no longer in a position whereby we can discern what is good information from not so good information. So, you know, this is the whole thing about like fake news and whatever. So, but
And
also
self-publishing.
and self-publishing, but also the lack of critical thinking that is in our society these days.
Another C word.
Exactly.
Critical.
We don't want to have the responsibility of thinking critically to make decisions for ourselves. We want to Google it and get the answer. Boom, done. Like less than a second. So, go on.
I mean, yeah, I was going to add as well that bikes are relatively simple things, right?
They were.
Honestly. Well, I mean, yeah, like the
They
concept,
still are.
The construct of the bicycle. Yeah.
relatively easy to get your head around. Whereas I think with cars, like, if you want to learn something about a car, you might have to put a bit more effort into that, and therefore you're almost less likely to just go along with gaining that knowledge. Whereas if I think people
To an extent, yeah.
But this is the disconnect of where the bicycle is now and where people think the bicycle is. So the bicycle was always something that you could tinker with in your shed, like basically with a set of spanners and some specialist campagness tools that you could take your whole bike apart and put it all back together in an afternoon after a ride. Whereas now you need specialist tools. You need, you know, to be able to bleed brakes or radiators or whatever, they're interchangeable. Like, and you need, like, everything's proprietary, everything's hidden, everything's integrated. And like, how many tools do you need, like, for like every threaded bottom bracket as a different tool?
There's already like I've got like 20.
Exactly.
Try bleeding some brakes with internally routed cables.
Exactly.
Where you can't move the
You
cables.
can't do it. But people, the perception of the bicycle in people's mind is the machine of freedom that is simple and livable.
To a certain extent, it's still exactly the same machine. They've hidden things. They've hidden things inside, whatever.
Well, it's the same with a car.
Same with a car. You know, your wiring is still all there. It's
Yeah.
just underneath the fascia.
Exactly.
You can get to it if you want to, but
But it's too much of a hassle.
They've done it so that,
Yeah.
even the plastic clips that they use need a special tool so you don't break them, so you don't have to buy new ones.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's how they get you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, meeting people where they're at, but also educating them on where the gaps are. And I think, like, going back to the original question, because I know we're rambling here now, like, of, you know, will it work? I think we need to reframe it.
Well,
That's-
I think
that's
it comes
not the
back
right
to
question.
our answer, which we use for just about everything. Is
It depends.
It depends. Depends on you. It
Yeah.
depends on the person. You know, the question is to be answered by you, not us. So I don't know. It's
Have we,
What we learned from that.
This is the trend for our podcast now. We end up opening
even more
Pandora's
a
questions.
can of worms, and we
Yeah.
end up getting to the end, and we're just like, don't know.
I think we just got work to do. That's all. Like,
look
doesn't
at the
stop.
Google reviews.
Well, I think the collective, it's the collective we, isn't it, as the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
Like there's so much variation. There's a lot of good people doing a lot of good work, and it's kind of bringing everyone up so that we all benefit.
Yeah.
And that's a long-term project
Yeah.
that involves everyone.
Yeah. Because, like, in some ways, we're almost asking for some kind of standards. But
Don't say standards.
yeah, you look at physio, and you know, there is a standard there to be called a physio. You have to, you know, do a certain amount of education, but it's not a marker for, you know, quality. So maybe we're just, you know, this is just where we're at, and
You need a bike fitting certificate.
yeah,
You need to make that, create it. Be like a doctor's office. You just get something framed.
You ever
on
been
the
asked
wall.
what qualifications you've got?
yeah, more so when I was first starting out.
Do you have
but-
any qualifications?
Yeah, but I don't know what they, you know.
You don't know
it
what they
doesn't-
are.
It doesn't mean anything to anyone else.
No.
Not grade 5 piano.
It's well, it's
I've got grade
like
4 piano.
the International Bike Fitting Institute at IBFI. Yeah, you haven't
just
even,
made that up.
No, like,
No,
see,
it's-
I mean,
it's
that's my case
genuinely a
in
thing.
point.
Yeah, it's
Like-
genuinely
Yeah.
a thing.
You haven't even heard of it, and it's trying to be like, you know, the standardized, you know, the standard for bike fitting is supposed to be like the qualification to as a mark that you're a reputable bike fitter or you're competent bike fitter, but nobody knows about it. Like it's only relevant if like the public know
Yeah.
about it. So,
Hey, there are qualifications to be a bike mechanic too, but
yeah, so
I
exactly
know
the same
plenty
thing.
of people who have all of them and they're still incompetent.
Yeah. And the same with coaching,
Yeah.
like the same with, you
Yeah.
know, everything else has got some kind of qualification.
If only there was a qualification that you could go through which proved your willingness to learn.
Actually, that's super interesting. I saw a headline. This is completely off topic, but you'll appreciate this. So it's talking about qualifications and standards. So as one of Britain's best female track athletes, Laura Muir, like Olympic silver medalist, multiple world medalist. She just recently got a new coach, which is Steve Cram, who, if you don't know who Steve Cram is, he used to be the world record holder in the mile. 1986, I think he ran 3:43, something like that.
That long ago.
3:44, so 3:43 something, and he was like, yeah, he was the man in the 80s, along with like Seb Coe, Steve Avett, like destroying middle distance. And the headline in this thing that I saw was Laura Muir now being coached by Steve Cram, despite him not having a qualification. It's like the guy's a former world record holder in the mile.
Do you know what?
He's
Yes.
coaching like one of Britain's best milers.
Yes, to a point, again, because you know as well as I do that there are plenty of former pros who they might have been really good in their prime,
yeah.
but in terms of being a teacher,
But
like,
obviously it's all individual,
Yeah.
and
He's
I just found
probably-
it funny
Yeah.
that was
probably
the
pretty
headline, that Steve Cram doesn't have a coaching qualification. I was like, is this what we care about?
And then it comes back to, you know, the question: how do people make that decision
Yeah.
about who to trust, who to go with, who's going to help them?
Exactly.
we need to pay more attention to each other instead of the screen in your hand.
Well,
That killed that, didn't it?
well, there's many ways of I don't know, convincing people.
Yeah.
So
I think it's just dialogue, isn't
Dialogue
it?
is
If
the
you're
big
thinking
one,
about
yeah.
a bike fit, whoever it might be, or if you're thinking about getting a custom frame or custom wheels, go talk to people.
Talk to us. Yeah.
Oh, it's like this lad who came in this afternoon just now. He was like, I wanted to find someone who had experience fitting mountain bikes because it doesn't seem to be that much of a thing in London for sure. So, you know, he called me up and we had a chat. Said, yeah, got mountain bikes. We can test your mountain bike outside. Blah blah blah. And that was enough for him to come in, which is great.
But without that dialogue,
Yeah,
you never know. So, yeah.
go talk to people.
Go talk to people. Talk to people IRL.
What's that mean? Today's episode was brought to you by the letter C. For convince.
Yeah. Well,
amongst other things.
let us know what your experiences have been with mechanics, bike builders, wheel builders, bike fitters.
Going in a can of worms.
How
yeah.
did you choose your practitioner?
Did you have a choice?
Oh, That's an interesting one. Anyway, thanks for listening if you made it this far. And yeah, young Matt did get some words in, which is good. So yeah, maybe.
Anything else to say, young Matt?
I've enjoyed listening. This was me listening to a podcast IRL.
Yeah.
Meta, not the
Yeah,
company.
I got a VR headset.
Yeah. Can we get the Sesame Street music to play us out? No, we'll get taken down.
I think we'll knock it on the head there.
I don't know. I think Big Bird's pretty patented, isn't he?
Disney now, isn't it? They own everything.
No, Sesame Street's not
I
Disney.
think it is.
Shut up.
They're canning it. They're getting rid of
No
Sesame
way.
Street.
What?
Yeah, I
How
think
can you
it's
get rid of
done.
Sesame Street? It's a street. They're going to do bulldoze it.
If you made it to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, do leave us a rating or review, as this really helps other riders find our podcast too, and motivates us to keep making more episodes. Thanks for your support, and catch you on the next one.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.